All right, hello everyone. So I'm doing this live thing. Asteroid, not the theoretical point, Black Moon Lilith. It's an actual planetary body or asteroid body. And not many people talk about Lilith. So I want to speak about her right now in particular because she's going direct. Just yesterday, she stationed direct in Libra. So whenever any planetary body or celestial body turns direction, direct or retrograde, it reflects the sort of a shift happening in consciousness relative to that planetary function. So let me introduce the asteroid Lilith. And again, this is different than Black Moon Lilith. For some reason, I don't know why, no one really talks about the actual asteroid Lilith. For those who are astrologically aware, you may have heard of Black Moon Lilith. It's important. It has a lot of meaning and a lot of teachings out there on Black Moon. But there's an actual body, physical celestial body called Lilith. And I feel it's really important to give attention to that. So this particular asteroid I feel is best understood first by looking a little bit at the mythology of Lilith. So I grew up in the Jewish tradition, and there's a very, very popular Judeo-Christian perspective on Lilith that is not very positive at all. In the story that I remember learning, Lilith was the original woman created with Adam, Lilith. And she would not be subservient to Adam. And so she was kicked out of the garden, banned from the garden. And then the story, teaches, then we have the more common known biblical story. Then Eve was created from Adam, and there's more of a, hierarchical relationship there. I learned that Lilith was the queen of the demons, and things like if you ejaculated, then she would collect your seeds and they would become demons and things like that. Ejaculated by yourself if you masturbated and things like that. So as a child, I was like freaked out about all that kind of stuff. I'm like, oh no, don't want that to happen. And to go a little bit back to the biblical story, we know very well, I know really well, that we have the story of Adam and Eve eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And they're tempted by the snake. And then as a result of their punishment, their physical lives had to become difficult. Like this whole dynamic of effort and strife and difficult childbirth and work hard, work the land. And to me, that whole story reflects in many ways the whole patriarchal paradigm of like life is suffering, life is difficult. And we've even learned recently, although many people have known this forever, that labor doesn't actually have to necessarily even be painful. There are all these conditions that we've accepted upon our human existence. And in the Genesis story, after they eat from the tree of knowledge, the next chapter, it says, and they realized their nakedness and they were ashamed. And it said, and Adam knew Eve, his wife. And the word yada is biblical knowing. Yada means knowing, and that word is often used to describe sex. And yada is the same root for the word etada, the tree they ate from. There's this whole dynamic where knowledge and ideas and concepts were introduced and placed upon what is natural and innate to our physical, biological experience. It became a thing to know, and thus a thing to possess. And so they became aware of themselves naked being a thing to then be ashamed of. There became standards of purity and ideals. So sexuality and what is pure and what is natural to our human existence became incredibly tinged and confused at that time. In that story, take it all as a metaphor, whatever. But it reflects definitely a patriarchal paradigm that we've been living in for a long time. Coming back to Lilith, this whole original story, it said, Adam and Eve, they did something wrong. It sort of perpetuates this inferiority dynamic. The snake was tempting and led them to evil. And we have the mythology of the snake throughout the entire Bible, predominantly, not in all cases, but often pointing to the idea of temptation or sin or some kind of evil dynamic. In general, sexuality, all things snake related, have not been regarded in very high esteem. So coming back to Lilith, there's been this notion of, she's evil, she's dark, she wouldn't follow the rules. But kind of look at her again from this more liberated perspective, and it's like, oh, yeah, that kind of makes sense. She didn't want to be subservient to some dude. The concept of that is actually very natural and innate. And she was kicked out of the garden. And what is a garden? Garden sounds really nice, really ideal, but in a garden is actually a manufactured space. Whereas outside of the garden, we have what's wild. And patriarchy in general has looked upon what is wild and untamed from a very negative perspective. Like nature, as it naturally is wild, untamed. And the patriarchal view of this has been, oh, that's dangerous. You got to protect yourself from that. So Lilith, at the core, recognizes the original, wild, untamed, uncontrolled nature of the feminine. And this is a force that is inherent to nature and that is inherent within all of us, men and women and every gender. The original, pre-conditioned, affected by the judgments and the shaming and the impositions of patriarchal thought that look upon what is natural as wrong and evil and dirty. And the Lilith archetype in our chart, and since I've been working with the asteroid Lilith, and special thanks to my friends and colleagues Lauren Moore and Kristen Fontana, and of course Jeffrey Wolf Green, that originally taught about this years ago, that have they've been pivotal in sort of me opening this. And I've had a lot of dreams about this over the past several months. And every chart I look at where I'm incorporating the Lilith archetype, and I really tune into it, especially in charts where Lilith is really pronounced, there is a theme, consistent theme of exile. Exile because the nature of the wild feminine. And when I say wild, I'm not like crazy wild. I feel often people talk about Lilith in particular, I mostly hear it with Black Moon Lilith. It's like wild, crazy, rageful. We often look at the feminine and the wildness as like this crazy, like frenetic energy, or like women on her moon. It's like, oh, she's crazy now, watch out. But it's like when I say the word wild, I'm literally meaning like what is not domesticated. And our relationship to that force within us, it's not a frenetic, crazy energy. It's just, what is it when we're not trying to control it and domesticate and make it subservient to our restrictions and our rules? So I've often seen where there's something within us in this asteroid that corresponds to a past of having, or even in this lifetime, it usually plays out in some form, being exiled, it pushed away. This is wrong, this is dirty, this is evil. So there's a lot of shame associated. Thus, the asteroid Lilith speaks to where we have the opportunity to reclaim this natural, original, feminine energy that is not subservient to something. And thus facing where there may have been a lot of internalized shame, repression, and the trauma of being exiled, of being kicked out, of not belonging. And there's a lot of value in really understanding that this Lilith archetype, archetypes, astrological archetypes that are discovered or talked about or really like addressed and researched at any particular moment in history corresponds to what's emerging in the collective. So it's important to recognize that we culturally do not fully understand how to integrate and respect and relate to the Lilith energy. And so when it comes to integrating that, we're also coming to face where we're meeting within ourselves and within the external world, where that which is wild and untamed is seen as wrong or inappropriate, or like, where do I put that? What do I do with that? So with that asteroid Lilith archetype, we're going to find ourselves also in this relationship to, how do I meet what doesn't fit into or belong into the domesticated notions and concepts that we've been conditioned by. And this is not like a Uranian thing necessarily, where it's like liberate from that, detach from that, because Lilith is very in the body, in the earth, in the world, radically so. But not radically like, oh, big deal, radical as in like really, like actually so. Whereas everything else has an element of control and suppression to it. So as I mentioned, Lilith is going direct now. And she's at that point where she stopped going retrograde for several months. Now she's like slowly building momentum to go forward. Whenever that happens to any celestial body, that energy is emerging right now. So there's an invitation right now. There's an emerging within the collective for this Lilith archetype for everyone in connecting more with a permission to embody and be authentic about our own natural, untamed, original, unconditioned, unshamed self, and thus meeting what has been shamed or exiled, not allowed to be here, not okay, not safe, deemed as wrong and dirty, and possibly meeting the rage that comes with that as well, to move forward, to claim more of ourselves. And this is in Libra. So specific archetype of Lilith moving direct in Libra is where we have numbed, suppressed, pacified our own self to accommodate to what is acceptable and okay and allowed within the constructs of the garden, within the constructs of what is safe and tailored according to a domesticated subordinate reality. How have other people said, no, you're not acceptable. I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to really accept you for who you are, to your natural self, your impulses, your desires, your being isn't good enough for me. And did we give into that? So facing that right now is really allowing ourselves to be who we are in relationship, to be authentic to ourselves. And where's Venus? Because Venus was Libra. So let's take a look at that. Venus is in Taurus. That's great. So for the next 9 days or so, 8-9 days, it's in Taurus. And right now it's actually trining Pluto. So, Venus in Taurus is about self-certainty, self-assurance, self-confidence, self-esteem, self-worth. Ultimately, it's like Taurus relative to Libra is like, well, Taurus, I value myself. Libra is, you have your expectations and projections of what I need to be. Here it's, I'm going to forge healthy and balanced relationship by rooting myself in the trust and the certainty and confidence and permission to be what I am. And that trine to Pluto is very powerful. So the next couple of days, really watch how that's emerging for us all. To embrace powerful self-worth, self-confidence, self-trust, and see how that deeply affects our own relationships when we put ourselves and our own soul sovereignty first before other things. So yeah, check out where that asteroid is. If you need to figure out, there's a website, type in School of Evolutionary Astrology ephemeris generator. And there's a link there for this really great. I think truenode.com/EF3, something like that. Maybe I'll put it in the links. You can put in any asteroid by name. So you can put in the asteroid Lilith, see where it was when you were born, see where it is now. It's very valuable, fascinating to track that. All right, so hopefully that was informative for understanding a little bit of this Lilith archetype, which really no one's talking about. Again, Lilith, not Black Moon Lilith. All right, much empowerment and joy. And I think as well that when it comes to really appreciating what is untamed and undomesticated within us, there's a lot to work through in terms of our own judgment and internalized shame. So may we be met with lots of acceptance and inclusion and approval for who we are. We deserve that.